I hope you will see it and that you are not cold. It's my very great pleasure. I am Thea Andersen. I am part of the executive committee of the MSA, but today I am representing the nomination committee for the SAGE Memory Studies and MSA Outstanding First Book Award. And we're going to have a full panel on the winning book of that award and its author, Catherine Gilbert, who's here next to me. And with me, I have an absolute dream team, because I have Esther Mujawayo, who's sitting over here, who's herself a survivor of the Rwandan genocide. She's an author, a sociologist, and a psychotherapist, and a truly amazing and impressive person. So we look forward to her having a discussion with Catherine later. I have Stef, whom most of you know already, professor of English at the University of Ghent, and an expert on trauma and witnessing. And then we have Wolf Kahnsteiner, who will help us in a moment. So I'm going to just briefly let you know why it was Catherine Gilbert's book that was given the award this year. I have to say, choosing that award it was a really fantastic task. It was great, a pleasure to coordinate the work of the book award committee. There were a lot of really great and lovely books. Apart from Catherine's book, we would like to mention two others that we thought were really outstanding, and one was Amy Sodara's Exhibiting Atrocity, Memorial Museums and the Politics of the Past, of Past Violence, from Rutgers University Press 2018, and also Yifan Goodman's Memory Activism, Reimagining the Past for the Future in Israel-Palestine, which was published by Vanderbilt University Press in 2017. However, though we did have this fantastic collection of really good books, and it was so nice to see the great work that's being produced by young, upcoming scholars of memory studies. This is a first book award, after all. It was really like looking into the bright future of memory studies. That was wonderful. So even though we had this really strong group, the committee unanimously agreed that we had to give the book award to Catherine. And I'm just going to read aloud to you the statement of why that was the case. So, in this compelling work, Catherine combines the study of literature as testimony with skillful and sensitive use of existing theory, moving the dialogue between trauma studies and memory studies forward in new and compelling ways. The book is beautifully written and well structured. One of the book's most innovative contributions lies in its use of Rwandan women's testimony to challenge established Western use of trauma theory to deal with the memory of atrocity. The book engages long-standing and difficult questions about who has the right to speak, write and be heard regarding traumatic historical events, while also rethinking the borders of witnessing between writer, reader and addressee. Ultimately, the book presents the reader with new ways of thinking about the structures of national mourning and reconciliation, silence and voice, and agency of testimony. This book also brings forward an important set of voices that are sometimes at risk of being silenced. So this is the book we are talking about, and this is the winner we have over here, and I'm very happy to say that she is to receive the award. Now, Wolf, you're on the floor.
My big moment.
Yes.
On behalf of SAGE, on behalf of the Girl Memory Studies, it's a great honor. Here.
Good. So now I'll give the word to Stef, who's going to say a little bit about how the book sort of contributes to memory studies, and then afterwards we'll have a discussion, a chat actually, a conversation between Catherine and Esther. So please, Stef.
Okay, thank you. There are three reasons why it gives me tremendous pleasure that Catherine's book has won this prestigious award, each of which is linked to a different layer of my professional and personal identity. First of all, as a scholar of post-colonial trauma narratives, I'm delighted that a contribution to this very area of inquiry is being recognized by the MSA. I see it as a sign of appreciation for the important work of decolonizing memory and trauma studies, in which an increasing number of researchers, including many at this conference, are engaged. Secondly, as a citizen of Belgium, a country deeply implicated in the genocide against the Tutsi, I am glad that a study that foregrounds and honors the voices of survivors of that genocide is receiving the attention that it and these voices deserve. After all, they went unheard in the spring of 1994, when Belgium, the former colonial power responsible for racializing the Hutu-Tutsi distinction, took the fateful decision to pull all of its troops out of Rwanda after 10 Belgian UN peacekeepers had been murdered, and lobbied for a withdrawal of the entire UN peacekeeping mission. 18 years old at the time, I still remember how the deaths of those 10 Belgian soldiers were the only thing the Belgian media and political world were interested in. They closed their ears to the cries for help of the hundreds of thousands of Rwandans who ended up being massacred, and the many more who survived but were left with enduring wounds, both physical and psychological. Their lives, it seemed, did not really matter. Catherine's book, the survivor testimonies it studies, and this award offer a welcome rebuke to this shameful idea. The third reason why I am thrilled at Catherine's win is that she is currently a close colleague of mine at Ghent University. We are lucky enough to host her at the Cultural Memory Studies Initiative, the research group that I direct, as a Marie Curie Fellow. I can assure you that we could not be more proud of her. I should point out, though, that we cannot take any credit for Catherine's success. The book that is now being honored by the MSA was published shortly before she joined us. Just wanted to make that clear. My brief for this short paper was to introduce the book to you by situating it within the fields of cultural memory and trauma research more fully than I did just now. So I'll get on with that without further ado. As I already hinted, memory and trauma studies have only recently begun to address issues of colonialism and globalization in earnest. As Michael Rothberg has pointed out in an essay titled Remembering Back, Cultural Memory, Colonial Legacies and Post-Colonial Studies, the founding texts of memory studies exhibit certain limitations, restricting the ability or inclination of early memory scholars to engage with colonial or post-colonial realities. For example, Maurice Halbwachs's organicism, his tendency to conceive of the various groups in which collective memory is located as homogeneous and closed entities, makes his work less obviously useful for understanding processes of colonization, globalization, and migration, which by their very nature dislocate such communities. Pierre Norat's influential Lieu de Mémoire project, for its part, is marked by colonial amnesia. It minimizes France's imperial history to the point of making it a non-lieu de mémoire. And Jan and Aleida Assmann's seminal work on cultural memory has tended to stress the role of institutionalized canons in the formation and transmission of collective memories at the expense of alternative archives and non-canonical memory traditions. Early work in memory studies thus reflected an imperial mindset, which still persists today, though there is at least a growing awareness of this as a problem. This is evidenced by the call for papers for this conference, which set memory studies the task to be as inclusive and diversified as possible. The memory studies community was urged to move beyond European and Western conceptualizations so as to allow the field to incorporate in a more systematic manner non-hegemonic epistemologies of the past. I was pleased to hear a good number of papers over the last 4 days that did just that. Eurocentric tendencies also plague the field of trauma studies, which is something of a subfield of memory studies, even if it has a rather different history. Here too, experiences of non-Western or minority groups have tended to be marginalized or ignored, despite the omnipresence of violence and suffering in the world. As is apparent from the work of Kathy Carruth, Shoshana Fellman and Dory Laub, Jeffrey Hartman and Dominic LeCapra, trauma studies as a field of cultural scholarship developed out of an engagement with Holocaust testimony, literature and history. Moreover, a flurry of trauma-theoretical publications also followed in the wake of the terrorist attacks of 9/11. If trauma studies is to stay relevant in the globalized world of the 21st century, though, it will have to go beyond its focus on key Western trauma sites and wean itself off its dependence on supposedly universal models of trauma and recovery that are rooted in the history of Western modernity. It seems to me that that process is well underway now. In The Future of Memory, Jane Kilby, one of the book's editors, states that while the future of trauma theory is to a large extent unpredictable, quote, "For certain, the question of globalization will dominate." This prediction, made in 2010, is being borne out, as the last decade has seen the publication of a number of monographs, edited collections and special journal issues that aim to move the field beyond its Eurocentric boundaries. Indeed, the tendency to consider trauma as a transcultural, transnational or global phenomenon is one of the most pronounced trends in recent trauma scholarship. While Western traumas, such as the Holocaust and 9/11, continue to attract a great deal of interest, cultural trauma research has lately begun to diversify. It now also includes a significant amount of work addressing other kinds of traumatic experiences, such as those associated with other genocides, slavery, colonialism, apartheid, partition, and the stolen generations. And there are a growing number of publications that adopt a cross-cultural comparative perspective. The expansion of the usual Eurocentric focus of trauma theory that we have witnessed over the last few years has gone hand in hand with a critical questioning of the supposed universal validity of Western definitions of trauma and recovery. While trauma tends to be thought of as a timeless, acultural, psychobiological phenomenon, the anthropologist Alan Young reminds us that it is actually a discursive invention that arose in a particular historical context. It has its origins in a number of late 19th and 20th century psychological and medical discourses dealing with Euro-American experiences of industrialization, gender relations, and especially modern warfare. The feminist psychotherapist Laura Brown points out that our definitions of trauma have been constructed from the experiences of dominant groups in the West, that is, quote, white, young, able-bodied, educated, middle-class Christian men. As a result, we have come to understand trauma as that which disrupts these particular human lives, but no other, quote unquote. The psychic suffering inflicted on the socially disadvantaged, members of variously marginalized groups, has stayed under the radar and failed to attract public recognition. In part, this neglect is also due to the field's preference for a modernist aesthetic of fragmentation and aporia, adherence to which has long been seen as a requirement for entry into the canon of valued trauma writing. The notion that traumatic experiences can only be adequately represented through the use of experimental modernist textual strategies has become received wisdom in trauma studies. Or it had become that by the turn of the 21st century, anyway. Trauma theorists often justify their focus on anti-narrative, non-linear, fragmented forms by pointing to similarities with the psychic experience of trauma. An experience that exceeds the possibility of narrative knowledge, so the logic goes, will best be represented by a failure of narrative. Hence, what is called for is the disruption of conventional modes of representation, such as can be found in modernist and postmodern writing. However, the risk posed by such a restrictive trauma aesthetic is that it may lead to the unquestioning adoption of a narrow trauma canon, as a result of which a wide variety of traumatic experiences and modes of representation remains unknown and unexplored. Vernacular testimonies, for example, rarely make the cut, as they often depart from the unspeakability paradigm, featuring witnesses who claim narrative and political agency rather than being passive, inarticulate victims. Catherine's book, From Surviving to Living, Voice, Trauma and Witness in Rwandan Women's Writing, strikes me as exemplary of the tendency towards pluralism and sensitivity to difference that is a hallmark of cutting-edge trauma scholarship. Based on fieldwork in Rwanda, interviews with survivors and close reading of their testimonies, the book is a comprehensive study of the existing body of Rwandan women's testimonial literature bearing witness to the genocide against the Tutsi. It examines not only the content of the testimonies, but also issues surrounding their publication, the collaborative writing process, and the ways in which the texts are presented and marketed. The book draws on trauma theory where useful, but is unafraid to critique the orthodoxies of the dominant trauma discourse when these would prevent it from doing justice to the testimonies of a marginalized group, to a painful history that has tended to be overlooked. Its overarching aim, as the introduction puts it, quote, is to explore how Rwandan women challenge and extend the Western understanding of trauma. Throughout the book, Catherine takes great care to respect the specificities of the texts under scrutiny and the unique struggles the survivors face in the aftermath of the genocide. This often leads her to take issue with received ideas. One important point that the book makes very eloquently is that the so-called impossibility of testimony is often less a matter of the survivor being unable to express her trauma than of the audience being unwilling to hear the story. It also takes trauma theory to task for focusing exclusively on psychological recovery and ignoring the material aspect of coping with a traumatic experience, which it argues is crucial for understanding the situation of Rwandan survivors. Another particularly valuable aspect of the volume is its discussion of collaboration, often with an already established Western author, in terms of facilitating testimony and providing access to the publishing industry, but also in terms of the manipulation and even appropriation of the survivor's testimony. I could go on like this, but I think you get the idea. To my mind, this book is right at the forefront of cultural memory and trauma research. On the one hand, it gives insight into the ongoing impact of trauma in post-genocide Rwandan society and helps break the silence surrounding the genocide and bring the plight of survivors to the fore. That alone would have been no mean feat. On the other hand, though, the book's bold and timely intervention in theoretical and methodological debates means that it has the potential to inspire not only scholars interested in studying the legacies of the genocide against the Tutsi, but all those seeking to expand knowledge of how memory and trauma manifest in non-Western settings. While I am wary of making grandiose claims for the relevance, utility, and impact of the work that we in the humanities do, I believe From Surviving to Living performs an important service in advancing our understanding of trauma and testimony in the Rwandan context and in modeling exactly the kind of scholarship that I think we need if the fields of memory and trauma studies are to become more fully and responsibly global. Thank you.
That was very beautifully said, Stef. Thank you. And I now have the pleasure of giving the word to Catherine Gilbert.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much, Stef, for that very generous introduction and situation of the books. It's very moving. I have to say I am absolutely thrilled to be receiving the 2019 Sage Memory Studies Journal and MSA Outstanding First Book Award. I think it's a wonderful initiative of the association that really helps to showcase the work of early career researchers, and I'm truly honoured to be the recipient of the inaugural award. I would like to take just a few minutes before we give the floor to Esther. I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about the book and my reasons for writing it. But before I do that, I must also say a few words of thanks. So first of all, thank you all for being here and for resisting the heat and sticking it out to the very end of the 4 days. And I'd also firstly like to thank the nomination committee, some of whom I have to confess I still haven't had the pleasure of meeting in person yet. So Jonathan Bach, Stephen Brown, Siobhan Katago, Ihab Salul, and Thea Anderson. Your response to the book was overwhelmingly generous and not to mention unexpected, even more so because the subject of the book is something that is very close to my heart, and it's really wonderful to see the work being recognised in this way. And as many of you in this room know, writing a book is a long and at times extremely frustrating process. So I would also like to extend my thanks to the many colleagues, friends and family members who offered their support and guidance along the way. Thank you also to the editorial team at the Presse Universitaire de la Méditerranée and to my editor Judith Mizrahi-Barak for her enthusiasm for the book and her belief in the value of its publication. But above all, thank you to the Rwandan women who have been generous and brave enough to share their stories publicly, and to those among them who I've been able to meet with and talk to in person about their work, about their reasons for writing their testimonies. And I'm really honoured to have Esther Mujawayo here with us today. Her testimony, Survivantes, or Survivors, is the first testimony by a Rwandan woman that I ever actually read, and her work is central to the book's thesis, particularly in terms of understanding the process of moving from surviving to living that is encapsulated in the book's title. And finally, thank you to new friends and colleagues, many of whom are in the room here today, who are helping to extend the conversations begun in the book and to constantly challenge the purpose of this type of scholarship, this type of memory work, to ensure that it strives to be as meaningful as possible to the communities it engages with. So I'll just say a few words then about my reasons for writing the book. In short, this is a book about Rwandan women. It looks at the testimonies written and published by Rwandan women in the first 20 years after the genocide, women who at the time of publication were living in Europe and North America. From a personal point of view, I've always been interested in women's experiences of violence and conflict, and I'm very much intrigued by the idea that throughout history, women have so often been the voiceless victims of conflict. And I hope that's something that is now slowly changing or has started to change in recent decades. But I'm also driven by a frustration, I think as Stef intimated, that so little is still known about the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, even among my generation who are old enough to remember what happened. And I suppose I'm trying to understand why there seems to be a fascination in contemporary society with stories of suffering and violence, and yet certain stories are privileged over others, while others remain very much in the margins. So overall, my aim with the book was to draw attention to these extremely strong and rich voices that may otherwise continue to be marginalized and silenced. So the book is underpinned by questions of whose stories are listened to, who has the right to speak, and who has the right to speak for or on behalf of someone else. The first chapter of the book, therefore, explores the figure of the witness. I'm drawing primarily on Holocaust studies and engaging with the question of who has the right to bear witness to a traumatic historical event, which is often framed in terms of duty, which, again, this duty to remember is an idea that's been discussed a lot in this conference over the past few days. Upon reading the Rwandan women's testimonies, there's an overwhelming sense that these women are indeed responding to a duty of memory, writing their stories first and foremost to keep the memory of their loved ones alive, but also to bear witness to the awful reality of how their loved ones died and to show the world the truth about what happened in 1994. And in this chapter, I also address considerations about the position of the reader as an empathic listener who must also shoulder some of the responsibility upon reading these testimonies. I was intrigued also by the way these testimonial narratives were being presented as stories of resilience and the triumph of the human spirit over adversity, with a particular focus on the question of healing. And so in the second chapter, I wanted to explore what in the West are taken to be universal notions of trauma and human suffering, and to see what challenges these women's voices are posing to perceived understandings of how individuals and communities should respond to and heal from traumatic experiences. And what I've tried to emphasize in my analysis is the importance of the particularity of the experiences expressed by the women, and the vast range of complex emotions and responses to the genocide, which raise significant challenges to our understanding of trauma. And I really wanted to underline the importance of listening to the needs of survivors rather than imposing an external model of individual trauma therapy. And this, in fact, is clearly expressed by Mujawayo herself in Survivante, where she explains that the vocabulary of trauma is in itself a Western imposition onto Rwandan culture, but a vocabulary that survivors must adopt if they are to communicate their suffering, both to the international community and perhaps even, as Mujawayo herself implies, to other Rwandans. And I'd just like to read a very short quote from Survivante, which I think encapsulates this idea. And this, I should confess, is my English translation of the original French for the purposes of this book. And Mujawayo writes, "The words to say it. This normally is the premise of therapy, to find the words to articulate her suffering, her madness, the internalized horror. This is, of course, a question of mental capacity, but it is also a question of vocabulary. Because in Can You Reconcile, the word genocide does not exist, nor the word rape, nor traumatism. We had to invent them afterwards, after the genocide of 1994. Now, this question of vocabulary and language runs across all of the testimonies, but it's not just about finding the words to express the experience, but also to find an audience willing to listen to that experience. And this is where I really became intrigued with the idea of testimony as a dialogic work. And what was particularly striking about the published testimonies is that the majority of them were written in collaboration with Western scholars, writers, intellectuals, journalists, etc. And so my third chapter interrogates the nature of these collaborative relationships and the problematic issues around questions of transparency, authority, and control over the narrative. Often the many layers of collaboration and editorial intervention are not made clear in the text themselves, so what we see is a polished, final version that may not reflect the voice it claims to represent. And actually, Esther's collaboration with Algerian French author Souad Belhaddad is particularly interesting, as I think this is perhaps one of the most open and transparent collaborations that I've come across. And I might ask Esther to elaborate on this in just a couple of minutes. But this also brought to light the continued difficulty for Rwandan women to access the Western publishing industry without some sort of sponsorship. And while this may be uncomfortable, it may ultimately be preferable than remaining silent or not getting their message across to the readership at all. And this question of silence, both the silences and the silencing processes, is the subject of the fourth chapter in the book. So here I explore the silences both within the testimonies themselves, so what is not expressed, and also the silences imposed externally. And Rwandan women are very much concerned with breaking the silence, particularly on the part of the international community for their inaction during the genocide and their continued indifference towards survivors today. The final chapter then, which was perhaps the most challenging chapter to write, looks at the ways in which the women deal with questions of justice, reconciliation and forgiveness in their testimonies. And these, as you are well aware, are huge questions which provoke an equally vast and complex range of responses from survivors. And many of the women draw on the stories of other women in order to try and make sense of what they are working through. Indeed, Esther's second testimony, La Fleur de Stéphanie, details the experiences of a number of different women and their involvement in the reconciliation processes in Rwanda. So ultimately, they express the idea that they want to go back to being fully living rather than simply surviving, trying to break free of the label of victim. And again, Mujawayo expresses this in terms of being survivante, surviving, or vivante, vivante, so fully living, living, I suppose would be the English translation. And these narratives provide an exploration of how sharing their stories can go some way towards rebuilding a sense of community and taking back control over their narratives. But I must say that the notion of from surviving to living also comes from the other women's narratives. Berthe Kaitesi in particular, to whom the book is dedicated and who sadly passed away, I think, in 2015, explicitly sets out this movement from survival through testimony to living. So finding her voice and writing her story is very much an integral part of this process. But I'd like to finish by reading one final quote from Esther's testimony, which I think really encapsulates this idea of moving from surviving to living, and then I might ask you to then respond to the book and say a few words about this. So again, this is my own translation. He who wanted to exterminate me, he will not see me destroyed. On the contrary, I hope that seeing me doing well will eat away at him, and that he will say to himself, I did all that for nothing, she is alive. I don't know if my reaction comes from pride or a survival instinct. I just know that being living, rather than simply surviving, is the only way to punish them. It is my only possible revenge. So I'll stop there, because I really think we now need to hear from Esther herself. And I'd like to ask you to say a few words about, perhaps in response to the book and also your own process of writing.
Yeah, but first of all, Catherine, I must say that I'm so proud of you. I really feel so proud that you got the prize. I was very proud that you became doctor, and now you have the prize of your book. I wanted to express that.
We've been in touch for several years, so it's been lovely to have that connection.
Yeah. And I really thank you for what you did, the work you did, taking all the testimonies, all the books which have been written, among them mine as well. And I really thank you also to dedicate the book to Bert Kaitesi. She was one of the very young survivors. She was a child, she was a kid, she was 14, and she survived with her siblings, and she had to be a parent, and this is a new phenomena which came with the genocide, the children becoming head of families, which was the case for Bert. And she did it brilliant. She put all the kids in school, and she was schooling herself and having problems in schooling, but in the end she made it. She made her PhD. I was so proud of her too, and she wrote a book, and unfortunately she passed away 4 years ago. So I'm happy that her memory is still alive with you dedicating her the book. Yeah. And what was your question?
Perhaps you could say a few words about your own process of writing.
Yeah. I wrote the first book in 2004, so 10 years after. I wrote with Suad Belhadad. Actually, I was talking a lot. I was going everywhere I could go. Any place when you let me talk, I will go and I will tell what happened, because it was so frustrating. The genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda was known. It was possible to prevent it. It was possible to stop it when it had started, but there was no will. There was no political will to do it. I'm happy, Stef, that what you said about the Belgian and what you recognized. Then when you survived, I survived. I was really lucky among the survivors. I didn't have any single machete. I was not cut anywhere. I was happy my children, my 3 daughters, they survived, but my husband was killed, my parents were killed. My sister Stephanie, the one for the second book, La Fleur de Stéphanie, she was killed with her 3 children, her husband. There was nothing left. So when you survive, you are there. I was, we thought we were crazy, actually. And I'm happy also that you addressed the issue of trauma, how it is seen in the Western and how it is seen in our place. So we were just thinking we are crazy. We didn't know about the notion. And we didn't understand what is going on, because the women we used to be were great women. We were responsible. We were doing our jobs. We were making our families. And suddenly, you find yourself so funny, forgetting things, going to the market, and you don't remember where is the market. You knew where was the market, but suddenly in the middle of the road, you don't know where you want to go. When you cook for the children, you will put 3 times salt, and it will be not possible to eat it, and you just wonder, something is wrong, and this was a big fear for us. Until the time, actually, I'm not so critical I'm critical, but not so critical with the Western way of dealing with the trauma, because it really helped us. It really saved us. I remember one very, very good psychiatric psychotherapist from England. He came to us And actually, as we were telling him that we feel like crazy, he told us, women, you are not crazy. What happened to you was crazy. So your reactions, what you fear, that you cannot dress properly, you dress and you put your dress up and down, or things like what I told you now. He said this is very, very normal for the abnormal which happened to you. And this was really, for me, this is the basic of the work I do now with traumatized refugees in Germany. This is the basic, and very important for the person to know you are not crazy. What happened to you was crazy. Then second question, okay, we are not crazy, but are we going to be again normal? And his answer was really good. He said, yes, we will be again normal. And you will even be more than before. This is the other theory, this post-growth, rather than post-traumatic stress disorders only, but this post-traumatic growth. You will be great women. And actually, so we followed him. It helped us. We came together. The very big need that we were having in the beginning was to have again a family. You can imagine that, after the genocide, you find yourself alone. You were the wife of somebody, you are now a widow. You are daughter of somebody, you are no orphans. You used to have sisters, they are not there. Aunties, they are all gone. All gone is our jargon to say they are all dead. So you find yourself in such emptiness. So who are you when they are not there? You really need to belong to, you need to be in our place. When you say, I come from, I can say, where is my clan? I can say, where is my family? But if there is nothing, with this emptiness, who are you? How can you go ahead? So it was so important for us. When we started, it was very informal. This Widows Association, this Avega, it was very informal. We just wanted, you meet Chantal, you thought she was killed, because actually any survivor was thinking, I'm the only one, because there was no way for people to survive. So you think you are the only one. And when you met another one, Chantal, you ask her, I remember we are very cynical, sort of humor, but Chantal, you are dead. No, I'm not dead. Then start telling, no, but my husband was killed, but my father was killed, but mine. Then Chantal meet Esperance, Esperance meet Pauline. This is how we really come together. And actually, we found out that it was so helpful to have people with whom you can talk. This is how we came together. And one telling the others, her friend saying, do you know what? There is a place where we meet and we are really, really okay. Because I'm not the only one crazy. When you were telling your story, you think you are the only one, and then you hear more crazy than what you have been doing. So in the end, again, talking of our cynicism, when you are so many crazy, it's okay. It is not like if you are the only one. But it helped. So how I came to write, I always talk too much. To come to the point is very difficult. So with my rage of knowing that it was possible to do something, it was possible to prevent that, it was possible and it was not done, anytime I could talk, I will talk. Especially in the places where I think, okay, now, during the time you have not been able to do anything, you didn't help us, now you can't say that you don't know it. Now I'm telling you, you know it, now do something. Because the needs were enormous. Of course, there was this problem of traumata, of being, again, okay and not crazy, but there was a problem of, there was no house. Everything has been destroyed. So we have to build houses again. We have to make a living again. But worse, when we started to talk and more confidently with the others, what we found out was really crazy. What the level of rape during the genocide, during 94, was terrible. So we found out that nearly 8% of us have been raped, and more than half have been infected with AIDS. So you survived the genocide, but you don't survive the infection that they put on you. I remember for my first book, I dedicated to a girl, Dafrosa. She was 15 and she died at the age of 19 because at the time we have not been able to find the medication. And this was also my rage, why I was talking, because in the time, okay, the justice was being done, okay, the UN has established this ICTR in Arusha. The people there who were imprisoned, who have raped women and infected them, so the people who were there and were HIV positive, they were getting the antiretroviral since day one, because this is the policy of the UN, and I agree, it's great. But the women who were testifying, the women who have been raped and infected, they were not getting any treatment. So we have to denounce that. So one day I was in a meeting where I was denouncing that, and there was a very good woman, Marie-Odile Godard. Unfortunately, she passed away too. She was a French psychiatrist, professor in university. So she was there, and after the meeting, she came to me and she told me, Esther, you have to write that. And I told her, no, I can talk very well, but I can't write. My husband could have written. He was professor of French, and he was very good with literature. He could have written something, but me, no. And then she said, no, but you cannot. I have a very good friend, Souad Belhadad, the journalist in France. And she said, I know that you two, you can really understand each other and you will make it. So from Marie-Odile Godard, she put me in touch with Souad Belhadad, and this is how the story started. So this is how I started writing with Souad Belhadad.
Could you say a bit more about the process of collaboration, how you actually developed the text together? Because I know you ended up developing a really strong friendship and traveling to Rwanda together and doing research for the second book. But how did you sort of go about constructing the text?
We started meeting. Sometimes I go to Paris and meet her, and I tell her the stories, and she's writing. Sometimes she will come to my place in Germany, because in between, in 2000, I got remarried with a German guy, and this is why I moved to Germany. So she will come to Germany, and I will tell her. And what was really great, Souad was very respectful, and actually, she encouraged me, and she told me, Esther, don't pretend that you can't write, because sometimes I was writing some pieces and sending them to her, and she told me, don't pretend you can't. So it is really a mixture of entretien with her. We were all the time on the phone, or some pieces that I wrote myself. But she's very good. She's a journalist, she's a writer, so she put all the things together. Yeah, and actually, what was good, after the first book, Survivante is very powerful. It is the stories of all the women that I told you in the beginning, thinking that we are mad, we are crazy, but we decided to use our craziness. Actually, this is our theory. It is like, you know, when there is a waterfall. If there is waterfall, it will destroy the soil. It will bring erosion. But if you canalize that water, you can make a plant of electricity. So somebody told us, women, you are so angry, you are so this, you are so this, you are so this. So use it in a proper way, use it to make it useful, and not to destroy, not to erode your life. Yeah. So this is the first one, Survivante. Mm-hmm. And like Souad, what you said in your book, which is very interesting, and it is helpful to write with somebody who knows. Souad knew everybody. She's the one who organizing the meeting with Simone Weil, for me to be able to meet Simone Weil. She found the editors, but also after, there was a lot of, we were invited in many places to make reading, how do you call it in English? The lecture?
Yeah, readings.
To make readings. And because Souad is also a comedian, I remember many people when we were talking, they were really moved and asking, what can we do, what can we do? So we put up a project called Au Lavage. a cow. Because one of my dreams was, and I was putting it in the book, if I was rich, I will offer a cow to every widow. Because a cow is not only, okay, a cow is like a book in the bank, la caisse d'épargne, what is caisse d'épargne?
Yeah.
A checkbook, where you spare your money, where you put your money and you will take it when you... Savings, yeah, like savings. Because if you have a cow, when comes bad moment, you can sell it. It is your savings. It is your savings in the bank. This cow can be very useful. But it is also, it was very, very therapeutic because when you are widow, when we were widows, you come from such, in the society, perhaps you were here, but when you are the widow, you go on the ground. So socially, you are nearly nothing, nobody. But with a cow, you are a little bit somebody. So it was bringing some recognition again. But there was also, I remember one old widow, when she received her cow, she was so happy, and she was saying, do you know what? It is smelling so good, the kuh ding. Normally it is really stinking. But for her, it was smelling good, because for her, it is what she used to be. She used to be a woman with a cow, with dung, with all this in her life, in her previous life, which is no longer there. But like we say, life has to be again there. So with a cow, with a stinking mist, her life was coming back. So it was therapeutic for her to be again alive. But talking about that, so we got a lot of money and we bought a lot of cows. And actually, the government made a project of the cows for the poorest family. I'm not pretending that it is from our project, but it was really interesting to see how it can touch many aspects of the life of the person. And this is when, but people then were always asking, like they always ask, but how is it in Rwanda? How is it now? How is it actually? And this is when we went for the second book, for La Fleur de Stéphanie. How can it be possible, victims and perpetrators together, to live together, which is the case. So we have a lot of talks with many people, many widows. How are you? Are you making it? How are you living with those who killed your people? And actually, the killer, I met the killer of my sister, of Stephanie, where there's nobody remaining, but only, I found that there was a small plant, a small flower that Stephanie has planted in our young time. When we were at home, she was the most beautiful, planting flowers and making things like that. I was more Tommy boy. And then everybody has been killed, everything has been destroyed, and suddenly, sitting in the ruins of our parents, I found out that that small flower, that small plant from Stephanie, was still there. And I thought, this is a sign, there is something, it is, what remains when nothing remains? And this is how the book, La Fleur de Stéphanie, came in.
They do love you. I do understand it. We actually have time for another small question. Okay. Yes, we do.
I wondered if you could actually say a bit more about the work of reconciliation that's going on. And I know you've done so much. You were one of the founding members of AVEGA, the Genocide Widows Association, and you're doing work currently working with refugees in Germany, but also back in Rwanda. The women of AVEGA and the women you talk about in La Fleur de Stéphanie, could you say a bit more about, because I think they're doing such important reconciliation work.
I think I'm very, my position with reconciliation is very, not ambiguous. I think there is, when people are thinking about reconciliation, meaning that you go and you embrace the killer of your family, I really say no. I think we have to live together in peace. I'm happy that the safeguards are there, have been since day one, so that we couldn't revenge. Actually, there was not so much revenge, because the safeguards from the politics were there, and there was no way to revenge. And this is why actually I say my best revenge is to be alive, and I know that this is making them crazy, and this is good. It is good for me. I'm not an angel. I don't want them to be happy, sorry. But I tend to say, we forget to say that many survivors have to reconcile first with life. How can you, we have so many people who feel guilty, especially the mothers who have not been able to save their children, even though it was not possible to do anything. There was nothing you could do to save your children, but you feel guilty because you have not been able to save them, and you are alive and they are not. I remember in the beginning, we have very, very hard time to accept that we can be happy again, that we can go for a drink. How can you go for a drink when the others are not there? You are a widow, they are all killed. But, excuse me, life is going on. How can you reconcile with this life? I remember one of the big problems also to reconcile. How do you reconcile with the beauty of Rwanda? Rwanda is so beautiful. Rwanda is very green. This temperature is not ours. Not at all. Not at all. I remember in the beginning, my fight with flowers, until I discovered the flower of Stephanie, but I was thinking, how can flower keep on flowering? And I remember really, you think that, you have to imagine that nearly every acre in Rwanda, there was blood of somebody. So I remember in our triggering, our traumata, thinking that everything is growing, and this was, actually it was so cynical. April, May, June 94 was the best year for harvesting. Everything was growing. So for us, for the survivors, we were thinking everything is growing from the blood of our people. And how can you reconcile with a good harvest? How can you reconcile with all those beauty? I remember one of our very beautiful lakes, Lake Chivu or Lake Muhazi. It is very beautiful. But in the beginning, I couldn't go to this place for holidays because I know that so many people have been thrown in. They died in the lake. Actually, today I have the same problem with the Mediterranean Sea. Because so many refugees, so many migrants, they die in this Maya. I have many clients in Germany who have the same problem, thinking of the Mediterranean Sea as the cemetery of so many people. And actually we have made, with my job actually, where I work, we made what we call Trauerort. We have made a place where people can come and mourn, because there are so many people without a place where to mourn. Yeah. So coming back to your question, to reconciliation, I think, I remember I was one day in a conference in Kigali, and the First Lady was there, and they asked me the question. And I said, if I was President Kagame, of course, I will work on the reconciliation of the nation. If you are a politician, if you are leading this country, it is necessary that we live together. It is necessary that we talk about what happened, and we come to terms. We can cope with our history, because actually there is no to say that we cannot live together, it is not possible. I put it in one of my books. When you go to fetch water in the rural area, you have to put on your head 20 liters. This is a jerry can of 20 liters. You will not put it alone. This is very basic in our place. So you always call the first one to pass to help you put the jerry can on your head or to take it down. So you have to live with the others. You will not wait for the one survivor coming and then waiting for him to come, and I don't want you to put this on. No, it is not possible. So we are so interlinked. And actually, what is also very, very important to say, people are seeing the they tend to see dual. The Hutus, they are all killers, the Tutsis are victims. It is not true. There were so many, not enough, but they have been Hutus who saved our lives, Hutus who even died. What Bert Kaitesi wrote in her book, one of the Catholic nuns who helped her to survive, they killed her because she refused to separate from the people she was hiding. So I think, and I always say again, when people are speaking of reconciliation between Hutu and Tutsi, I have no problem with my neighbors Hutu who have been helping, my colleagues who have been helping. But those who killed my family, I have a problem. So there must be justice. So we have really to be clear with the words that we use.
I think that resonates with everything we've been talking about in this conference, the importance of terminology and the nuance in the way that we talk about things. So thank you very much.
So I think that was a beautiful ending of a very nice panel, and I'd like to thank all of you very much. Esther, many thanks. Yeah. Thanks so much to Esther, to Catherine, and to Stef, and to Wolf for delivering the diploma. And I would also like to abuse this opportunity to thank the organizers from the deepest of my heart for doing such wonderful work, creating such a nice conference that I have enjoyed tremendously. And yes, Esther, you want to say something more?
I was forgetting something, which is really, really nice to say, talking about reconciliation with life. I think after the genocide, there was something which was terrible to realize. It's not only people who are killed, it is also a society which is really, really destroyed. And I remember one of the things which was really heavy for me was to think at the greetings. In Rwanda, when you greet somebody, the eldest have to, you take the youngest in your arms and you wish something. So if it is a young in age of being married, I wish you a husband, gira umugabo. So after the genocide, you are really afraid to wish somebody a husband because there's so many chances that she's a widow. If it is children, we will wish them gira so na nyoko. I wish you father and mother. And there were so many orphans. If you wish, what do you wish else? Cows. If you meet somebody, you wish, amashongore, I wish you so many cows. But the cows, they have been killed in the same time as they have been eaten in the same time as they killed their owners. Or if you are Christian, the thing was, yes, akuzwe, Jesus be glorified. And so many people have been killed in the churches. And Jesus himself has been cut. There are some places they cut his nose like he has the nose of the Tutsis. So I remember this was really terrifying to think of a society which doesn't have greetings. And talking of the reconciliation, where I get reconciled with my society now, I feel so happy to meet all those young people and wishing them wives and children and cows and everything, and you see that it is really coming. So this was my last thing, and I don't know what I wish you.
You can tell me later.
If they let people go, they don't come back.
Yeah, we should go through now.
You are welcome.